Okay, welcome everyone to the webinar. And this is the second New Directions pre-conference webinar for our New Directions East Asia Conference. And as you can see, the webinar is called Connecting Reality and Assessment Practices, Interactional Competence Constructs for Assessing Language for Specific Purposes. And our speaker should be here, Dr. Pataraon Patarakon, if she is here. Could you turn on your camera and join us, please?
My camera is
Excellent.
on. Can you
There you are.
see me?
Yes, we can see you, and I can hear you as well.
Okay.
Excellent, great. So we'll start in just a couple of minutes. I'll just go through some introductions and some initial information about the conference. Okay, so first of all, I'm Richard Spivey, and I'm the New Directions Conference Programme Chair, and I'm a researcher at the British Council. And welcome again to this New Directions webinar. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. We've got quite a few people on the call today. If you're not familiar with New Directions, this is a little bit of information about the conference. So this is our flagship language testing and assessment conference from the British Council. It's held every year in East Asia. We've had 11 editions of the conference so far. And we are going to be in Bangkok in Thailand this year in October 2024, in November 2024, sorry. And we are going to be looking at all things to do with assessments and policy at a local, regional and international level. So yes, so the 2024 conference is in Thailand. It's in November, 21st to the 23rd of November. Registration is open at the moment, so we will give you a link where you can register for the conference later. It's at Chulalongkorn University. It's a face-to-face conference. We won't be doing any online parts to the conference, so you will have to come to Chulalongkorn to see the conference if you want to attend. And our main theme is the power of language assessment on individuals and on society. So that's the overall theme, and these are the different sub-themes that we have. So language policy learning, systems and assessment, policy and society at a wider level, English with other languages, so multilingualism, and yes, we have technology and AI as well, which I'm sure will be a very popular theme. So this is the second of our 3 webinars, and this is how we're going to run it. So our speaker today is Dr. Pataraon Patarakon from Chulalongkorn University, and she'll be speaking probably about 40 minutes. If you do have any questions, please write them in the Q&A, and I will select some questions at the end to be answered, and then we'll wrap up with a bit more information about registration for the next webinar and for our conference in November as well. So, as I said, our speaker today, Dr. Pataraon Patarakon from Chulalongkorn University. She obtained her PhD from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and she's currently a lecturer at the University Language Institute. Her research interests include conversation analysis of classroom interactions, role-play interactions, task-based language assessment, and rubric construction and validation. Her talk today is called Connecting Reality and Assessment Practices, Interactional Competence Constructs for Assessing Language for Specific Purposes. Okay, so I will now hand over to Pataraon over to you. Thank you for joining us today. I will stop sharing my screen.
Hello. Nice to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to a very wide variety of audience today. I can see in the chat that you guys are from many different places. So good morning to some of you and good afternoon to some of you, or maybe good evening to some of you as well. All right. So is everybody hearing me, well? Can you please maybe let me know in the chat, before I get started?
I can hear you loud and clear at the moment.
All right. Thank you so much. So let's get to the overview of the things that I plan to talk about today. So I wanted to talk about interactional competence. Let me maximize my screen a little bit. Okay, so I will be talking about interactional competence. Let me know in the chat how familiar you are with this construct or with this concept, so that I have an idea of how much detail or I should get into, when I talked about this, and then I'm going to try to talk about the how do you view IC through the lens of conversation analysis, and then I will discuss how you want the application of interactional competence and the bridge that we can form between assessing language for specific purposes and the assessment of interactional competence. I will talk about an example from my work, which is in a classroom assessment situations, and then I will talk about practical issues towards the end. Okay. All right. So let's get started, shall we? Before we get going, before I talk about interactional competence, I want you guys to think about, a time, when you come across somebody that you talk to, and you think to yourself like, wow, what an effective communicator, what a great speaker he or she is. I want to ask you these two questions. What are the qualities of that speaker? And what are the feelings that you have after talking to that person? I would like to give you some time, and I would like to see some answers in the chat. Please. So the question is, think about the time that you interact with someone who make you think, wow, what a great speaker, or like, what a great communicator. What's the qualities of that particular person? Yeah. And what is the feelings that you have after talking to that person? I can start seeing now some answers. I'm not gonna read just yet. I want to kind of give you some more time to really think about these questions and answer the questions. So I see answers like eye contact, succinct, in the information. They listen well, ability to relate to the audience. Oh, I like this one. They elevate my own feeling of competence. You learn something from them, right? You feel like you have improved. They can communicate clearly. The way they speak, maybe a little bit more information over here that would be nice. Yeah. You wish you could communicate as well as them. You feel that you're being heard, which is sure is appropriate. Ooh. With conviction, body language. Okay, so generally speaking, so these are some of the things that we have relatability. Sounds more kind of like, you know, you're building a relationship with the person. Yeah. So the answers that I've, you know, seen a lot, yeah, before, you know, kind of similar to what you have mentioned. So we have things like, you know, clear message. Yeah, an effective speaker can convey the message very clearly, easy to understand, right? And an effective speaker show, yeah, great ability to listen. You feel heard. This is actually one of the most important things about interaction, right? Most of the time, people want to feel heard in the you know, interaction. Um, not so much, not so much want to kind of like, you know, like listen to the message itself, but it's more important if you make somebody feel that, you know, they're being heard. Yeah, it's very important feature of a, you know, effective communicator. Another one is that you know, they tend to have kind of like a relaxed, friendly, you know, disposition. They make it seem easy, right, to communicate with the person. And then usually one of the things, intersubjectivity, I hear somebody mention intersubjectivity. Basically, intersubjectivity is the kind of similar to clear message. You can understand each other, right? You know, let's talk about the last. Sometimes you can also mention, like, you know, a sense of humor. Yeah, the person is funny. Yeah, there's some kind of like light tone to it. So these are the things that you know, it's, of course, it's not the exhaustive list. This is not everything that people usually kind of cite when it comes to effective communicator, but we start to get a picture of what it means, right? Of, like, you know, somebody who have a great sense of like interactional competence. The idea of effective communicator basically is hi. It's not just about the knowledge or the ability inside the person, but it's also have to do with the methods. Yeah, the kind of like the way that you know, he or she carry themselves while being in the interaction, right? The presence. Yeah, the concept of interactional competence comes from the root between, like, you know, linguistic anthropology. I'm just going to touch upon this really briefly. You know, Del Himes, talking about like communicative competence. Yeah, the idea is that, like, there are many kinds of competencies that require in you know, being able to use a language. And then it's kind of like combined with ethnomethodology, which is kind of like a branch of sociology that talks about you know, how you know, social actions. Yeah. So basically, the idea of interactional competence signify, or, you know, embodies you know, the way that a competent members organize and accomplish social actions. The key message here is that it has, you know, less to do with language itself, but more to do with the actions, yeah, or, you know, interaction, of course, you know, being done, right, through words. You might think of, you know, ideas of speech acts. Anybody familiar with speech acts? Yeah. So speech acts are things like, you know, what, apologies, request, what else? Uh, yeah, sorry, I just blank out on speech acts all of a sudden. But basically, speech act is kind of like a precursor before people get moved on to talk about interactional competence, since the idea of speech acts can be a little bit kind of restricted, right, in terms of like what people do with language. Yeah, and so moving to interactional competence, in terms of the definition itself, right? So you can look at the screen here. I highlight the keyword for you so that you can kind of like understand the gist of it, and you know, the importance, yeah, within each of the definition. So you know, recently, you know, interactional competence is theorized, yeah, as the ability to co-construct interactional in the purposeful and meaningful way Yeah, taking into account sociocultural and pragmatic dimensions of speech, situation, and events. That sounds a little bit mouthful, right? But what does it mean? So the key thing about this is that the term co-construction, what does it mean, co-construction? It means that interactional competence is not usually viewed as something that one person inherently possess, right? But is the ability to, negotiate. Hello? Can you hear my voice?
I can hear you, yes.
Yes? All right. Sorry. So I see some of the comments in the chat saying that they cannot hear my voice. So I just want to check. Thank you so much. All right. So getting back to the point about like co-construction, right? The ability, it's not something inherent in one person. It means that it's not like I can go around and say like, oh, I have a very high interactional competence, and therefore it means that I'm going to be able to convince everybody that I talk to that I'm such a good, interactant or like such an effective speaker. It's not like that, right? So it depends really so much about how I negotiate actions with my interlocutor or like with the person that I talk to, right? In that particular situation. So the interactional competence can be viewed as something very situated, very much kind of like a here and now. It's very hard to assess, or it's very hard to, kind of gauge somebody's interactional competence without having interact with them, right? That makes sense, yeah? And so, it's kind of different now, right? When it comes to like, idea that somebody is very good at Spanish or English, but now we're talking about like, what is it that the person can do, right? What is it that the person can accomplish? Yeah. So if, for example, if you have to convey a message, in a certain situation, when you look at interactional competence, you're asking a question of like, can you do it? And can you do it well? Yeah. Well, in the sense that like, can you convince the other person to understand what you want to say in a manner that is recognizable as being well organized, right? And, competently done. Yeah. Right. So moving on to a different definitions, which talk about the same thing. This is one by Hall and Peckard-Doller in 2011. So international competence is ability to accomplish meaningful social actions, to respond to co-participant previous actions and make recognizable for others what our actions are and how they relate to their own actions. And so the key feature that I want to highlight here is how interactional competence is, an accomplishment, right? So you can kind of, get things done, yeah? And then, it's also in the manner that is time sensitive, and it kind of responding to what happens before, yeah, and you build your competence that kind of related to the what you want to come next, right? Does it make sense? And so interactional competence can be viewed, yeah, two ways. In terms of resource, yeah, repertoire, people have like, an understanding of how certain situation can play out, right? How certain social actions are done, yeah, and also the methods. In terms of like, how do you use that knowledge? How do you use that repertoire in kind of make it, become reality? I would like to give you some examples. Yeah. You might think about how the last time you went to, let's say, buy, food at a food stall, right? So if you have international competence in buying food, right? What does it mean? It means that at the end of the interaction, what's going to happen? You get your food, right? You get your food done. It shows that you as a client come in with a certain competencies, yeah, and also on the other hand, the seller also has certain level of competencies as well, and it's not just the knowledge and the knowledge of vocabularies that you have, but also kind of how you mobilize, yeah, those knowledge and make it into a reality. Make sense? So far, so good. All right. So let's move on to like a little bit more details, yeah, more technicality. We might have to kind of like understand that the basis, you know, because of ethnomethodology background, that background of interactional competence is very much informed by, you know, the tradition of conversation analysis. And so I want to kind of talk about the key terms, yeah, and framework of conversation analysis, because conversation analysis is used as a framework, right, in the way that we view, right, interactional competence, and also document interactional competence, as well as the way that learners move from, like, you know, beginner, right, to advance in terms of their his or her interactional competence. And so terms that you might hear, yeah, when it comes to conversation analysis and interactional competence are things like overall structure organization, sequence organization, turn-taking practice, yeah, audience design, repair, things, etc., etc. What do these terms mean? Okay. So I would like to kind of, you know, ask you to look at this excerpt with me briefly. Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see this, right? But let's take a look at this. If you can see here on the side, can you see my mouse? You know, hovering on this, you can kind of, you know, put your answers in the chat. Okay, all right, thank you so much. So the conversation analysis is a way that, you know, you study conversation, right? And, you know, we bring order to chaos. Yeah, we say that spoken interaction has its own organization and structure, and it starts with the simple unit of turn. So one turn represent one action. Okay, so far so good. So one turn represent one action, and when people put their turns together, it becomes interaction, right? And then so turns together form a sequence, and then sequence together form, and, like, you know, sequential organization, and sequential organization, of course, becoming a larger activity. Yeah. So just to give you an example of how will this particular exchange sound, or, like, you know, look like in terms of how we view the structure of it. From the outlook, right? Let me move to the next slide quickly. Yeah. So this is the same conversation, but without understanding over, like, you know, the analysis on this part, you can see that it might sound kind of random, right? Yeah. So this is a conversation between a clerk, let's say, like, working at the movie theater, and a client. Yeah. So a client is represented in CL. You can read the blue part, you know, because it's kind of like easier to understand. So the clerk, when this is a telephone conversation, yeah, and so when client call in asking about, like, a time, the movie time, you know, by the way, this is a very old old piece of data, and that's why you might kind of like, oh, who called movie theater these days? That, like, you know, I understand that, but this is kind of like back in the day, yeah. But still, the organization of conversation is still very much the same. So that's why I'm using this example for you guys. So you can see here, like, you know, there's a telephone call, right? And then the clerk pick up the phone and say, Crescent Theater, may I help you? Yeah. And so this is a question, right? May I help you? And then we have a client said, yes. This is a response, right? And then what is playing tonight? So this is another question. Now, what is playing tonight? We're showing the African elephant and American wilderness. So that's the answer. And then we have here American what? And then we have American elephant, and then, oh, African elephant. And then there's some laughter over here. It seems like, you know, pure chaos, yeah, from perspective of like a general conversation. And then we have like, a repair over here. We have like, oh, American wilderness, yeah, and then we have thank you very much, you're welcome, and then the end of the conversation. So conversation analysis saying that like there's very structure to this conversation. We say like, oh, every single action is paired, yeah, with first pair with the second part. So basically we have greetings, right? Greetings, and then we move on to question answer pair, and then we have a repair initiation over here in line 7, a repair initiation. And so the issue of repair is that when there's a repair initiation, the actions that is going on is put on hold, right? And so there's a repair initiation, American what? And then the person trying to deal with the problem of like the repair. And then there's a self-repair. That's another one. So like the person saying something wrong. Yeah, so this is another kind of like self-repair over here. And then once the self-repair has been, done, then it moves back to the main business of like thanking and then closing. Right. So for conversation analysis, the structure of conversation is very much, what is it called? Standardized. Yeah. So we see this a very kind of like a stable organization of talk, which is very different, right, from the way that we see grammar in general. So the focus here is not about like language per se, but all about like, whether you make your action recognizable to your participant. And if that's the case, then, you can move on with the next action. Right. But when there's no intersubjectivity, meaning that like there's a kind of like initiation of something, and then maybe the response or the recipient, turn is done in a way that is not what the first person expected, then there will be some problems, and they will deal with that problems before moving forward with the next action. And so with this kind of it forms the basis, right, of interactional competence. Basically, you can see that like this person here, has a interactional competence of what? Of dealing with problems, right? So interactional competence can be kind of talked about in terms of the way that they structure their actions, structure their turn, design their turn in such a way that it can accomplish the, the social actions in a way that is, they call it lean, meaning that like the least problematic way possible. And then when there's a problem, then it's dealt with immediately, because the longer you kind of postpone dealing with the problems, right, you prolong the repair, the harder it becomes for the repair to get like dealt with, and it can kind of cause a lot of misunderstanding, so on and so forth. Yeah. And so this is kind of like a basis of how people now view interactional competence. So far, so good? Okay, so moving on to this understanding how like it's kind of a nested model, right? Turn to sequence, yeah. So you can see here the sequence become like greetings, question, answer, and then, once you get the answer, you're thanking and closing. This is a very simple sequence organization, yeah, for like telephone call, especially when like it's about like transactional informational like this. But there are many studies that talked about like different kinds of social actions. For example, just to give you this one is opening the presents. Yeah. So Good and Beach have done an analysis of overall social organization of how kids, right, open the presents at birthday parties, things like that. And so we now know that usually what things that generally happen is that it starts from like acknowledging the giver, reading the card, opening the gift, announcement of what's the gifts, and then positive assessment, like, oh wow, this is such a nice gift, and then finally thanking the giver. And you can kind of understand, hopefully, that like people who have like their repertoire, their understanding of what social actions supposed to be kind of like play out, right, will have less of a problem going into this kind of social actions, right? Without without this understanding, going to a party might makes you feel like, anxious, like you don't really know what's happening and you don't really know what to expect, right? And so that's kind of like, the showing the lack of interactional competence in that particular situation. And so with with explicit understanding knowledge, and we can kind of look into the research that has been done in conversation analysis as a rich kind of like platform that we can learn from, how people interact. I think that we can kind of like start to see how interacting in social situations can be there are levels of accomplishments that you can get and you can get through. All right, I want to move on to the next point because I realize that we are running slow, a little bit behind. So interactional competence has been, this construct of interactional competence have been kind of incorporated in many major test developments. Yeah, for example, like Trinity College London. So as part of their speaking proficiency assessment, they have included kind of like part of interactional competence in terms of their, they included interactive speaking tests, in their rubric and rating scales. You can also look at, Cambridge, English speaking test. They included, a criteria called like interactive communication in their rubric. And rating scales, and even CEFR, like Common European Framework of Reference, also included, the idea of turn taking, cooperating, asking for clarification. This is about like intersubjectivity, right? Online conversation, discussion, so on and so forth. So the concept of, or like the construct of IC has been kind of slowly, right, adopted by major language tests. And I know that even for like TOEFL, I'm not sure. I think IELTS is a little bit different, but like TOEFL, they're looking for ways to kind of include IC, in their future iterations of their language assessment in the future. Now, in terms of like research, because speaking proficiency is one thing, but interactional competence is also addressed as a construct for research that has been done. These are some examples of notable work that's been very prominent in research of international competence. So there are studies by Yuen. She had done lots and lots of research on international competence, especially in the context of like academic, EAP, right? English for academic purposes. So she has this rubrics, that include things like content delivery, language use, sensitivity to situation. So all these, so you can kind of look at these criteria, right? That has been coined, to kind of try to capture the feature of international competence as an extra, construct to just speaking proficiency, because we have, I think, there's a study by Rover and Ikeda that talked about how language proficiency, like speaking proficiency, it's not quite the same as international competence. And there's some discrepancy there that leaves some space, right, for us to kind of go in and try to address international competence as a construct. Ikeda talked about like facility with language. I want to kind of like highlight this here about like turn organization, engagement in interaction. So you can kind of think about it in terms of like the way that the speakers show their listenership, right? Their engagement, in the interaction. And then LAM, this is a study done on group speaking and assessment, talk about responding, interactive listening, so on and so forth. Okay. And so here's a part where I want to move to a little bit different direction here. So let me remind you that at the beginning, how the concept of international competence is kind of, very much as situated, and specific to situations. Of course, the person who can order food competently, he may or may not be able to socialize competently at international conferences, yeah, in or like go to trade shows and try to present their product for their companies, right? And so there, of course, there's a wide range of international competencies. There are a lot of things that people can do with their language, and it doesn't mean that he or she, is a good or bad, like with with good or bad international competence, because I think we have to be very specific here. What do we mean by like, oh, the person is very good, has very high, international competence, yeah, or low international competence? And so let's move on to the idea of how like, international competence is more compatible with language for specific purposes. Moving to how like, there in conversation analysis, there's a branch of study that has done on institutional talks. Yeah. And this is a very interesting area of study because it kind of look into like situated use of language, right? The key thing about institutional talk is that it involves like special goals, yeah, special constraints, special reference, of course. And here are some of the examples. I'm going to move over some of the examples of the work that has been done in the past, like rich area, yeah, like for example, medical consultations, news interviews, court proceedings, job interviews, service encounters, including like ordering food and before pharmacy consultations, yeah. And so with this rich area of findings from conversation analysis, especially like institutional conversation analysis, you have a kind of like a database, right, of things that we can use for teaching our students and also for using as a baseline for us to kind of create assessment that can help them reach the point of how like, from novice to become more competent speaker in, specialized situation, right? And so just to kind of like highlight a little bit on the feature of language for specific purposes. And so Douglas, 2000, talked about how LSP, right? You need to have authentic tasks. Yeah, it means that it should be the same as the situation that they use language in real life situation. And also another feature of it is that like there has to be an interaction between content knowledge and language knowledge. And so the way that like international competence can kind of, it's a nice marriage between I see between LSP, it's the following. So authentic tasks, what can we do? Authentic tasks, now that we understand like and have a very specific understanding of how the interaction is supposed to go, right? Or like how does the competent members in that speech situation supposed to go, we have a very solid understanding of like the target language use, yeah, and we know the outcome of what it's supposed to be like. And also in terms of the interaction between content and language knowledge, okay, so it's another thing which of course better fitted descriptions is that like we bring in, right, institutional knowledge, and like we don't have to kind of theorize about the institutional knowledge because it's evidence, yeah, in the way that people use language in interaction and get things done, right? And so the procedural knowledge, the declarative knowledge, that's required. It's very much through the way that people interact, yeah, in the institutional setting. And so just to kind of like, give you a practical like application of this to like in the language classroom, I wonder if you have like background in or like you have a context of teaching that is related to LSP in any way. Like if you can tell me what language for specific purposes that you are interested in or like you are currently teaching, can you please let me know in the chat? That would be very helpful. Thank you. So for conversation analysis, like we view, the task or like any language use as a social activity, right? An interactional practice. And so we can kind of use this angle to say that, the task or any speech or practice that we're trying to teach the students, we now can kind of view it instead of just checking the language competency or the clarity of language or the accuracy of language and things like that. We can look at it in terms of how it's a it's a social situation, and it's we look into what action actually that the students are trying to be able to do, right? And then we can use the conversation analysis framework to help map, right, from what's the overall structural organization of the I love these examples that you have provided so far. By the way, we have tour guides, English for academic purposes, engineering, management, business, economics. Wonderful. Right. And so just to give you an example, so when you have a task that you already have in your classroom context, right, the next thing, if you really want to, if you try to apply, right, the framework of conversation analysis or interactional competence into the things that you're already doing, the key point is that you have to think about what is the task that you have in assessing the ability of the students. And then the task can be a role play. It can be the task that you ask the student to, go out and do while we're cabin crew. Perfect. The task that you have the students, get done, right? In the real life situation. And so let's collect some data, right? Let's see how the students do this task in real life. And you can also kind of use the, findings, from the literature that's been done, if there's, the literature been done, I have shown you some, right? The doctor patient's consultation and, so on and so forth, courtroom, right, interaction, mediators as well, the work by Elizabeth Stokel. So you can use that as a baseline, when you're teaching and also when, testing. But when it comes to assessing this, interactional competence, I want you to start with looking at the assessment task that you have in the design of it, and then look at the data and try to kind of see from the conversation analysis point of view and see what is the overall, sequence organization of the task. And then ask yourself, in completing this task, what actions are they actually doing? It's almost out of time. I'm going to skip over to the data itself so that you have some kind of idea. So this is an example from my context, right? So I also taught, English for engineering students, and we're teaching them socializing skills, right, for engineering students. And we, for the task, we asked them to do a group role play. In this group role play, we say that, okay, so hypothetically, they're going to this trade shows and they're representing their own company, right? And what they have to do while doing this role play is that 5 to 6 students get into the same group and kind of simulate this kind of small talk, kind of chit-chatting, socializing, information before the conference started. And we want to kind of see how the students accomplished this activity. And so we have the rubric for the students as well, but I want to just highlight the part that is relevant to the students. I'm going to skip over 2 slides. Okay, so the rubric that is relevant for the students is about the content. This is the thing that we require the students to do. So the student need to talk about personal information, job responsibilities, and exchanging business cards. And so here are the things that I have identified from the students' role play, right? So the students would go through this kind of overall structural organization of the small talk, the socialization. So task opening, self-introduction, work talk about their job responsibility, contact exchange, post-conference arrangement, and then activity termination. And so the way that so I think that instead of just having a rubric that assess every single thing, right? In terms of like, audience design, turn taking design. I think that it kind of loses meaning a little bit if we kind of not paying attention to like what activity that the students try to do. Because once we see that, oh, this is, let's say like we're talking about activity termination, right? We can kind of zoom in and understand like, oh, so for activity termination, we have an understanding from the literature that like the students have to kind of, doing some pre-closing sequence first. So it's not just kind of like, hi, bye, and then they just leave the conversation, right? So they have to kind of like, somehow work together to bring the idea that like, oh yeah, it's time to go. So there has to be a pre-closing sequence, giving warrants, or account, of why they have to kind of like go over, and then before ending with some kind of like terminal exchanges, like goodbye, see you later, nice to meet you, and things like that, right? And so I don't think I have time to show you the data, but I'm going to skip over to kind of see how like with this understanding that like, oh, so here is the activity that the student is doing, and here is the baseline, right? This is what the data from the literature tell us about like, the kind of competent way of doing conversation closing. Then we can kind of like say like, oh, here is successful, right? Activity termination. So recognizing appropriate interactional opportunities, manage pre-closing, formulate reason for leaving, re-invoked appropriate minimal last business sequence. And then we have like examples of problematic, which is like sometimes they initiate the turn disruptively. They show lack of awareness of the sequential organization. And then there's a poor kind of like pre-closing turn design. So sometimes it's kind of like a sometimes it's kind of like a very like disfluency, like we see a lot of repetition and things like that, right? And so we can kind of like use this to moving on, sorry, scale the student's achievement into like appropriate, odd sounding, and then like, failure to fulfill the interactional task altogether. Yeah. And so I want to kind of talk about the practical application. So I think that, with this way of like formatting interactional competence with the specific tasks that you want the students to do, we can provide like more specialized feedback for the students, help the students really bridge the gap between what they are doing right now in the, the target like, situation. And we can help with the material development and improving instructions, refines the rubrics that we have, so on and so forth. And so, so that's the end of my presentation. Sorry for going over time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'm going to have a look and see if we've got any questions in here. I can see we've got one from Jamie.
Hi.
Jamie Clayton, and I think you can see that question as well, can't you? Well, he says, as the nature of interactional competence relies on more than one person to be involved, is it really possible to award individual scores to people in, for example, a group speaking assessment, where test takers are talking about various options with the goal of deciding which option to choose?
So the question is like, how do we tease out individual contribution from group contribution? Is that correct?
That's what I understand from the question. Yeah. So how can we give individuals a score when everything is co-constructed, basically?
Right. There's a great like writing on this. I think it's by Casper and Rover in 2013. Talks about how actions are co-constructed, but each person comes in with different responsibilities. Yeah. And so, while of course you have to kind of negotiate the actions in real time, but given that each person have different goals, right? And each person carry different responsibilities. You can kind of like use that as a baseline to judge his or her accomplishments and also competence in doing his or her project. Make sense? And therefore, I'm not saying that this will work in all the scenarios. Yeah, like across the board, we have to kind of look at like case by case basis. But yes, it is possible. Yeah, I think it's it has to be, because otherwise, I don't think it's realistic to kind of give the group score all the time, right?
Okay, good. Thank you. No, that is something which is talked about quite a lot in the assessment world.
Yeah.
We have a comment on that from, I think that was from Nick Lesson. Says, from my own research, I'd argue it's not either or. You can think of IC as on a scale from individual actions to co-constructed actions. Okay, interesting. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions that anybody has on this topic? Okay, I think there's one in the chat. I'm just switching over to the chat. When using conversational analysis, what group sizes are recommended and what length of time? That's from James.
I think that practicality might dictate that more so than the theory. And it depends on like the situation and the language use that you want the students to be able to do, right? For certain scenarios, like if you want to kind of check the student's ability to, let's say, like ask for what's it called, a letter of recommendation from their advisor. I think it makes more sense if it's kind of like a one-on-one, kind of like a pair test and things like that. But in any other context, yeah, I think it depends on what is realistic. That kind of connecting the task that you're testing with the real world application. Does it make sense? So in terms of practicality, of course, the more people, the more complicated it would be. So yeah, I think that it's hard to answer specifically, but yeah, usually when it comes to the literature, they kind of just categorize like 2 people and then multi-party, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more questions? I think we've got time for maybe just one more question before we go, if anybody has anything they'd like to ask. Okay. Do you have any other advice for assessing interactional competence? Because it's not something that everybody is comfortable assessing, maybe because they don't feel confident in how they can assess it or what things to look for.
It's kind of interesting how you say that, because for me, I see it as a inevitability. I think that the way that we come to view like spoken interaction and the way we assess it is it's incompatible. You know what I'm saying? In that, like, if you still use like grammatical structure or like accuracy the same way that you kind of grade speech, like a one person speaking with talk data or like the kind of activity that require more than one person, there's always going to be some kind of flaws, right? And so I think that like we have to switch our mentality here, in that like it's not speaking ability, it's talking ability, and the framework that can kind of address like talking ability is interactional competence. And this is I think it's a matter of like I think that I see a lot of potential in the way that we can move away from just view language as like a one person kind of doing monologuing to interaction. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so I think that hopefully, I know that it's kind of a difficult move to kind of go. Yeah. But I think like if people see the the importance of actually, I think that is helpful for the learners, especially in this day and age where like AI can kind of replace a lot of the, monologuing, language ability. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so like the ability to interact, to actually negotiate actions with another person, the ability to get things done, right, in language in a way that it's competent, it's effective, right? I think that we have to kind of like, um, you know, uh, make the jump, and then I'm sure that over time we'll find kind of like more practical ways. Yeah, with more people jumping on board, I think we're going to be able to find like more practical ways to like go about doing this. Make sense?
Yep, that makes perfect sense. No, it's good that I think we're finally, particularly in assessment, where I think we're definitely seeing the worth of interactional competence quite a lot more. And there's been a lot of work, like the work that you've done on it over the last few years. I guess one of the challenges we have now is that as we are starting to move towards automation and AI and the kind of technological aspects, is how we keep that sense of interaction as well, because our technological solutions often encourage more kind of monologue type speech acts, or not kind of genuine interaction. So that's going to be a major challenge for us in assessment, I think.
And I think it's kind of scary to think about how like people losing ability to interact like over and over, like over time, right? Like, just the ability to listen or ability to relate with the other person in the interaction. I think that it's something that we have to make kind of like an active choices to prioritize, I think.
Mhm.
I think that I'm starting to sound a little bit more scary. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Okay.
didn't.
Well, your talk was very relevant, I think, and very interesting. So thanks once again for joining us today and giving us sharing your expertise with us. It's really, really interesting um, and informative. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So just before we finish, we'll just move on to our close. I will move to the closure now. So please do register for. We have another webinar. I'm going to give you a QR code where you can sign up for that. That's next month, the first week of next month, Wednesday the 5th. And that is with Dr. Paruat Imsad from Thammasat University and Tai Tisol. And you can also register for our conference, and you can use the QR code to get to the website. Jordan, thank you, is now putting some links into the chat. So that's for the next webinar and direct link for the conference as well. Thank you very much, Jordan, for putting those in. And if I go on to the last slide here, so yes, so this is also for our upcoming webinar. You can see that's Wednesday, November the 5th, 4 p.m. Bangkok time. So please do sign up for that. If you want a certificate for today, please join up on the survey, and the forms link has just gone into the chat now. Thanks again, Jordan. So if you click on there, and you will see an option to get a certificate on there as well. Thank you very much for everybody for joining us today. We hope to see you again at a future webinar. We hope to see you at the conference in November as well. And thank you, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.